Hey guys, I'm Chris,
And Mike.
and welcome to No Limits, the Thriller Podcast. What's new this week, Mike?
Hey, a little something different this week on the podcast. Kind of cool to talk to Eric Bishop, a behind the scenes chat about the life of both a published author and now a self published independent author. We went into the weeds with him. It was fun.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to him about more about the book, but it was also very insightful to, learn about this and going through his struggle, or not struggle, but like we don't really get a lot of this aspect from the various authors that we talked to. The only other one was, oh, I forget the name of the guy, but he was also doing all this Amazon self-publishing stuff. Yeah, super intriguing, like sort of peeling back behind the curtain to see, what it truly like is to do this on your own. I guess we've gotten a little bit of introspection from Ward, who also has a full-time job outside, or like had a full-time job outside of like writing originally. Yeah, so really interesting to peel back behind the curtain, understand that. Yeah, great guy to talk to. Really enjoyed talking to Eric Bishop today.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend The Body Man. I mean, go back and listen to our episode on that and our interview with him because it's kind of cool that we saw his fully fleshed out novel with a character at the White House. And it was really like a high stakes, heavy drama, like big political consequences kind of drama in that book. And it could take the time to cook and get into a lot of nitty gritty on the setting and the politics. And then this book is a novella, so it's almost a much more quicker, crisper read. We're not going too deep into any one thing. We're just kind of keeping it moving. So this is a nice little break from whatever heavier reading that you're doing. We have a very packed reading list the next couple of months.
Yes, we do.
So this was almost like a refreshing, breath of air to read it. At times, I was in and out of the story, but I have to say in the end, it's an absolute worthwhile read for a twist that comes halfway through. And if you have read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. We have a lot of fun at the end of our interview getting into spoilers. So the first half of the interview is spoiler free if you have not picked up Ransomed Daughter by Eric Bishop. And then you'll hear a spoiler alert. We make it very, very clear when we talk about the twist at the towards the end of this book. So definitely if you picked it up, listen. If you haven't picked it up, still listen, then click pause before you do. I totally recommend it for that reason, because even you, Chris, we were texting and, we were enjoying the book, enjoying the story. It's a universe we're not really fully immersed in yet, because as a novella, how much universe building can you do? There's not a lot of page time for it, but we both started digging the story once the twist happened, and we realized why some characters were doing what they were doing and why some shady things didn't seem to fit. And in the end, it all really checked out and was a fun ride. So, like Adam Hamdy says on the cover, a short, sharp, action-packed adventure, and definitely worth your time.
Yeah, and I think it'll make you want more, and I'm excited to see where he can go with this. Along with, because he mentioned in the interview that he's going to be ambitious, 2 books next year, sequel to the Body Man, and then also the first full length novel in this series. So yeah, more to come from Eric Bishop.
All right, guys, today we are joined again on No Limits, the Thriller podcast, with a good friend of the podcast, a great follow on social media, Eric Bishop. Welcome back to No Limits.
Welcome.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good to see you. Mike, I think it was only you last time. I think Chris was down and out or something. There was something going on. I don't
Every
remember.
time. And then I got COVID for a 4th time 2 weeks ago. We were supposed to record, so thank you for rescheduling, because I really liked the Ransomed Daughter, so I wanted to have an opportunity to talk to you about it. And we didn't get a chance to talk last time, so
Glad to chat.
I was just going to say, before we get into things, just for the audience to know, we like to cover spoilers here on the podcast. But Eric, we're going to try to save that maybe for our last 10, 15 minutes or so. That way we can hear from you a little bit about this book, how it came to fruition. You might as well be nicknamed the Grinder, because you are out there grinding every single day. And so we want our audience, even before they pick up the book, to hear a little bit about your story. But as is our specialty, we'll ask you about the actual plot details and these characters in Ransomed Daughter at the very end. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Glad to spill the beans. It's been out for a little while, so they're going to figure it out anyways. So
Quick read, too, as a novella. Tell us about that choice of going from The Body Man, a full-length novel last year, to this novella now in the Troy Evans Omega Team universe.
yeah, so it's actually the quick version of the story is I was fully anticipating coming out with Breach of Trust, within a year and a half of The Body Man, and all great plans sometimes end up in the crapper. So that's the definition of life sometimes. But no, publisher did not like Breach of Trust. I don't know what to say about just difference of opinion whether it should be published or not, and I felt pretty firm that it was good. I didn't really see a way to change it that would make both of us happy, so I just said, it is what it is. We can either publish it or we can move, go our separate ways, and which is it wasn't an easy thing to decide, because it's definitely not one of those situations where, hey, if I wrote it, it deserves to be published. It's not an ego thing, but I really believed in the story. And I had several readers that agreed with me, basically, more than several. So, kind of just made that decision of, well, what do I do? Because I did get the rights back. At that point, you're kind of at a crossroad because it's hard to get another publisher to pick something up. Vince Flynn would probably be, one of the exceptions to the rule of, self-publishing his first book and then, being, the monster success that he was. But that's rare. And at that point, I had so much invested in it, I didn't want to roll the dice on going back to the board and trying to see if I could find someone else that would publish it. I decided, I've learned a lot in these last several years. I've made a lot of contacts. I had been always hesitant to self-publish, and I can talk about that after this part. But I decided to move forward with it, but to take a step back for a little while and do it the right way. And so to do it the right way, I knew it wouldn't be quick. But I also know that this is a business where if you don't put something out, once a year or within a reasonable time period, people forget about you. You're old news.
Right.
So what I did as soon as the parting with the publisher happened is I kind of went back to some of the things I had written before The Body Man, just to see what kind of, were they good wheels or were they junky, flat tires? And I decided I had written several novellas, actually, and I just kept coming back to Ransomed Daughter. I really love the characters. They're part of the first series of books I wrote that never got published. And I went through it several times. I gave it to a few people and said, what do you think? And they're like, man, publish this. And I also thought with a novella, doing it through my own entity, because it took me like 6 months to basically create a book imprint, create an LLC and, hire someone for logo and edits. And just, I outsourced everything that I shouldn't have been doing, which was most of it. I should write, and I'm pretty good at marketing, but I even outsourced some of that. Yeah, I just said, it's a lot of the same steps as putting a novel out, and I learned that. But where it saved a lot of time to do a novella was the fact that to proofread it the numerous times I had to, and to make a lot of edit, which is what I did for about 2 months, beginning of the year, I could get through it a lot quicker with it being 35,000 words versus 95,000. Right. So the time factor was why I decided, and I believed in the story, first of all, but I also thought if I'm going to try to put Breach of Trust out, let me kick the tires with something else first that I believe in, which also then gives me the opportunity to open up the world of Troy Evans and the Omega Group while at the same time keeping the Body Man series going. So, instead of doing one project, might as well do two,
The grinder, like we said.
What's another? What's been the biggest hurdle you found to going this on your own so far?
Well, trying to keep the biggest hurdle is trying to do it the right way, and I don't know if that's the right way to word it. What I've seen with other examples of either small publishers or self-publishing is it's difficult because you sometimes feel like you can do it all yourself. Mm-hmm. Or you might not have the resources to be able to outsource it. So you have to do it yourself, or maybe not publish anything. And if I was going to put it out, I wanted to put out a good quality product, which meant I had to be in a position where I could turn over the things I'm not good at, a la cover. I shouldn't be designing a cover. I have good concepts, but I'm not a graphic designer. So had to find someone to do the cover. Also, like editing, I needed to find a really solid editor. I can do a decent job, and with software like a Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly, you can get by and put something out there, but I need someone to come behind me and say, hey, dum-dum, this is not, and I had several of those. The editor I gave it to was like, this isn't the way they normally do it. I didn't fix it in the manuscript because you did it quite a lot. So you can put it out this way, or I suggest you don't, and you fix it. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, hey, writing for dummies, version Bishop. So yeah, but so getting those folks on board, I hired someone to do like, logos and that kind of stuff, which a lot of it was just reaching out to folks in the industry and saying, hey, this is what I need. Give me some names of people you recommend. So probably the hardest part's been trying to coordinate all that. Well, while at the same time, I have 2 kids, I have a full-time job, I travel a lot or enough. And I do some days try to even write, although
Wow, that's a
I'll
lot.
be writing again soon, but it's been sparse the last couple months.
It sounds like a true balance, but I love how, and even multiple times in just these few minutes, you said it was what you truly believed in. The decisions you made had to ultimately be guided by what you thought was best. And that value judgment is hard in a world with a lot of voices, a lot of people with different objectives that may not match your creative, expression. And it really seems like you're finding success sticking to your guns and what you believe in, but then leaning on the people around you that you've created through these relationships you have. For example, your social media presence. It sounds like you've connected with so many great people who assisted you along the way, and they want to value the fact that it's your product, your baby, but they want to help you bring that to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely been a balancing act, but and just take a step back from that. I'm fortunate, and most people are in the same boat I am. I don't have to sell books to eat. If I had to do that, it would probably be a different situation. So I'm fortunate that I can hold off and only put out something that I believe in, and also I'm not needing that income. I live off my job, and then my writing is my passion, but I can have that luxury of not having to have, because that puts a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if people actually, and that's the side of the business I didn't know in 2014 when I wrote my first novel. I didn't know the business side of it at all. I just had a good story idea and thought, oh, I can write a novel. And, I wrote a pretty decent first novel, but it wasn't good enough to be published. And so as I've learned and as I've gotten more into the industry, and then I've seen the business side of it, that's the whole side that I think as a writer, you're not prepared for. You're not prepared for the business side. And I have a business background. I have a finance background. I'm a financial analyst by trade. So numbers and all that kind of stuff and contracts, those kind of things don't intimidate me. But understanding how it works in publishing is a totally different beast. And it's hard. It's hard to balance that very well because you want to write, but that doesn't happen anymore. You can't just be purely a writer. Even if you're a big name, if you're the Brad Thors, the Jack Carrs, the Stephen Kings, whoever, they're doing marketing. Now, some of them will do a lot less than me or other people, and they can pay people to do a lot of it. But nowadays, people want to, they want that visual presence or that online presence. And that was the first thing I learned when I wrote my first novel and I sent it out for agents. I had a couple people interested, and their first question was, well, what's your social media presence? And I replied basically like, social media is for suckers. I don't do that. And they're like, yeah, when you have 10,000 Twitter followers, come back and talk to us. And I was just like, gosh, really? Are you serious? They were dead serious. They expect you to do, even if you get a traditional publishing deal, they expect you to do some heavy lifting.
That's crazy though, because how many people out there with a story to tell, like you obviously have had many of inside of you, get crushed by that system then, right? Like the geniuses and the voices of history that have changed history and, have not always been the ones who are the loudest or the most popular. Right. And their work has still withstood the test of time. So what does that mean for the future of the industry if it's about numbers and publicity and this marketing side of things versus nurturing the creative talent and really trying to find that diamond in the rough?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I do think, that being said, I do think there are those talents that can burst through without any of that. But I think it's the exception of the rule nowadays. Right. Just for the interactions I've had with people I've interacted with people with some big publishing deals, and it's a business, and it's not a slight at the publishing world, because now that I'm putting stuff out myself, I see what it all takes to get something, to get a product over the finish line and then continue to market it. It's not a small endeavor. The crappiest part of it, though, is the author is typically the one that gets the smallest percentage of the pie.
It's crazy.
And that's what stinks, because I've done now both sides of it, in the publishing in a very small degree, but I've had to touch a lot of pieces of it, and you realize how much work it all is. But then I also think about it and go, man, the person that created this amazing story is the one that might get 15% of the money.
That's crazy.
Blows your mind. Which is why I think a lot more people are looking at a hybrid approach, which is, I'm not doing full on all self, or I won't do all self-publishing. It's not my intent. I want to do a hybrid approach between traditional and self-publishing. But you see why people want to move to self-publishing, especially if they can invest some money into it, because it's cool to invest a little money and then get almost all of it back versus get a traditional publisher. And some people still have to pay, still choose, and might have to in some cases, to pay for marketing and help do marketing. And they're getting the smallest slice, and once people become successful, then their percentages increase. When you've proven that you can make the publishing industry a lot of money, they'll give you a bigger piece of the pie later on down the road. From a business perspective, it's smart, but it's still kind of like, wow, this is insane.
These are things that you don't really think about as a fan, but
tough way to make a living. So people just read books and go, hey, I like this author. Cool. Keep supporting that author, but realize, man, there's a whole industry back there that's people are really having to learn and not fight against, because it's not you're not fighting against the industry, but you're having to learn the industry. And then you kind of pick and choose what direction you want to go. Do you want to do full on traditional? Do you want to do small publisher? Do you want to self-publish? And they all have pros and cons. And some are very large. Even with big publishing, there's some large cons. And small publishing, of course, there's a lot of problems because you have to either do everything or hire out just about everything.
Yeah. I've always wondered about self-publishers who go the pure like Kindle route or Kindle Unlimited. Mm-hmm. And that's based on number of like page turns I've heard on Kindle Unlimited. So it really just becomes about how much content can you put out there. And if you have a small group of dedicated readers, as long as they're turning every page, like romance novels, if you put out 30, 40, 50, 60 of them a year, people are just going to rip through them if you have that dedicated crowd.
Right.
Have you found, how is it working with like your big names like an Amazon, or I don't know how it works with a Barnes and Noble, or we even use a platform called Scribed, which just rebranded to Everand. How do you feel self-publishing? Is it okay going with some of those big name companies that are kind of mass conglomerates of all this media that they can just put out there for a subscription price, or does that hurt the independent authors?
I think it can help them. It can unfortunately it can be a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. So I've never done, and I know people that have, so I know enough about it to speak intelligently, but I haven't done Kindle Unlimited so far. I only have one thing out.
Right.
So probably have this conversation maybe a year from now, and maybe I'll have a little bit more insightfulness, because I'll have the plan is to have 2 books out next year. I'll have the follow-up to The Body Man, Breach of Trust, probably late spring, early summer. And then I'll have the follow-up to Ransomed Daughter, not a follow-up, but the next story for Troy and the team. Their next mission is tentatively going to come out probably late fall, early winter of next year. So next year I'm going to double up, which is insanity again.
Ambitious.
Yeah.
I've got the books are there. They just have to get some polish, and they have to have covers, and they have to have all the pieces I did for Ransomed Daughter. Fortunately, I've got all the behind the scenes stuff in place now for that. So some of it's less effort than it was to set it all up and do all the
gotcha. Yeah. Once you have that machine going, it'll go much
faster. It'll kind of help out. And also The Body Man, when I parted with the publisher, The Body Man kept the rights for to keep publishing The Body Man. And I just had anything after it, or anything else I did in any other series. But the publisher actually is, I don't know when it's effective, is going out of business. Oh, so wow. I'll actually I thought it was happening this summer that I was getting them back, but it's still for whatever reason, it hasn't happened yet.
But you will get the rights back?
Yeah, I'll have the rights back to that, effective probably by the end of the year, if not before. So I'll I'll put that one out, because I have everything in place. I have the draft, I have everything. So I just have to do an upload, and it'll take a full weekend of work, but I've got the mechanism in place to just put that up. And so that'll go up under my own brand as well.
Nice.
So yeah, so it'll be, but cool thing with that is then I'll be able to bring the price point down a lot more for that. I won't have to charge the same price for the ebook or the paperback. I probably won't do a hardcover option for The Body Man. And that's another thing, and I have no problem discussing that, but the hardcover options, if you're not traditionally published or through a big enough publisher, it doesn't have to be one of the big 5, but a big enough publisher that actually is out there doing orders for mass quantities of books. If you're doing a one-off print of a hardcover, like through either through Amazon, which Amazon's actually a little better than Ingram Spark. Ingram Spark's the one that Who the Body Man hardcover came off of. Those numbers are horrific.
Yeah, the margins must be terrible.
Yeah, you're making nothing. If I told you the amount of money I made every and I sold more hardcovers than some successful authors, and from what I've heard, the amount of money I made off hardcovers was beyond a joke.
Was there an audiobook for The Body Man? I can't recall.
It was not. I tried to get the publisher to do it. I even tried to throw money in the kitty and say, hey, I'll even pay for half of it and stuff, and the publisher wouldn't go for it. I kind of understand it, because you're not a proven track record at that point for your first book. And that's something I've looked in a lot for Ransomed Daughter. I was going to do an audiobook, and I still might. But the amount you have to invest on the front end it's very risky, especially if you run through ACX, which is what Audible's company. You don't control the price, so they get to choose the price. So then it's really hard to know ahead of time how many units you have to move just to break even.
Right.
Like I said earlier, some people are trying to write and actually put food on the table. Other people just want their words out there. But man, from a business perspective, if you just want to even get your money back, your investment back, you got to move some units. And it's not like 50 books. 50 books aren't going to do squat for most people.
It's interesting because I don't know if I've ever done an audiobook for a novella, and we're huge audiobook fans.
Yeah.
I feel like they're so easy and kind of fun to sit down and read without a huge investment of time.
Right.
That it's almost like that would be a podcast episode. A novella I think of more of a podcast episode, like a long form 2-3 hour one, than an audiobook, which, man, The Body Man and Breach of Trust coming, I would love to have an audiobook of that down the road. Where a novella, I kind of do enjoy sitting down with one and knowing I'm going to be able to rip through it.
Well, and if you have an Audible account, you're not going to want to use one of your credits for a novella.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
$14.99 for a novella would be really pricey.
Right.
And I understand that. So if I had the control of saying, hey, set the price point for a novella at $6.99, I know how many units I'll have to move. We can make money. Not having that ability to know what they're going to set it at, or maybe they will still keep it at $14.99 or $20.99. No one's going to buy a novella.
Yeah, that's tough. Right.
Yeah, so then the numbers aren't, and those are the stuff that I had to learn. That part of me is happy I know the business side of it, and the other part of me that wants to create books says, well, darn it, I don't want to know any of that crap. I don't want to get in the weeds, because what happens when I have to dive in the weeds for that means I'm not crafting, the third book in the Body Man series, or the third story that I've got for Troy and the Omega Group. So, but it's a good problem to have, because 2014 I wrote my first book, and I just dreamed of being a published author. So now to know I've got 2 books out there, I'll have probably 2 more by the end of next year. Again, it's a blessing to have that problem to deal with, and it's just time management. You kind of have to decide what you're going to do. For me, if I'm really, especially in a mode of working on stuff, the one thing I have to just stop looking at is television. Stop watching TV, stop binging, Yellowstone and all these other series. And it might be fun to watch, but guess what? That's not helping you finish a book.
No, it's not.
So,
yeah, I wanted to, talk to you a little bit more about, let's get into this story. And you mentioned that you not only have this novella, but a couple other ones. What sort of inspired you to, come up with this Omega team, and where do you see them going in the future?
Yeah, great story, or a great question. So at that point I had written 3 books in Troy Evans' world. 2 of them had the Omega Group, and one was actually a prequel of how Troy became Troy, how he, got on the Omega Group and everything. So I was kind of doing them not quickly, but it took a couple years to get those out, and I was learning a lot of things. I was getting rejections all the time from Vengeance was the first book that came out with Troy and the Omega Group. I was, kind of waiting on all my we're not interested emails to come through, which was super not fun to get, be told no a lot. Well, in the meantime, after a couple of years of going through all that, I didn't want to keep writing 6-7 books in Troy's world and then have 0 published. So as I was kind of like working the first 2 books through the system, I had downtime, and I was just like, I don't want to start another full book. And I just had all these ideas for Troy and the team. And I actually had started them like thinking I would like release them through my website and stuff like that. So I just started crafting these stories and didn't really do much with them until years later, where I kind of went back to them. And so the ideas were always especially early on, I'd have just tons of ideas. And so I would just jot them all down. I had notepads just filled with different ideas. And then when I'd have the time to sit down and write, I'd flip back to those and go, that's what I want to do with Troy and the guys. Or as the books move on with Troy, he actually moves into a different role. In the first books I wrote, he moves into a different role outside of the Omega Group. So then I had all these stories of what he did after that period of his life, because I kind of advanced him kind of not quickly, but I didn't keep him like Mitch Rapp stagnant where he doesn't age almost. So yeah, so the ideas were just there, and then open up the world of the Body Man and kind of the same thing. When I finished that story, I was kind of waiting actually to get an offer, waiting for stuff to happen with the Body Man. I started a book for Merci, who's the female assassin.
Oh yeah.
So I started like her own novel. Plus, I already had started a novel before that I still haven't picked back up, of Eli and Kat. When you leave off the Body Man, Eli and Kat are going off to look for a missing U.S. senator.
Right.
There's a whole novel there, and I only have like 2 chapters of it done. It's called the 29 Club. One day I'll get back to it. Again, I've got too many little projects on the shelf right now. But the cool thing with that world and being able to create it is you can take a story like that and several characters you really believe in. And I like the idea of giving them out in their own, giving them their own storylines, their own books, and then crisscross them back in. So I haven't really heard much about it, but I even put a little something in there for keen observers and Ransomed Daughter to point out of like, hey, I think I've seen that name before. It's like, yes, you have. So those worlds are going to collide. And I don't know exactly when or how. I haven't kind of figured all that out. My pantser kicks in on stuff like that. But yeah, I like the idea of doing that where you have maybe 2 or 3 book series going, and every so often those characters intersect and they need each other, or they're going to battle each other, or whatever, or they're going to yell at each other, whatever.
That's I love cool. How you have this web, this universe, because as readers from the fan perspective, I saw a few name drops here, or even a little story about what Troy did back in his army days, and one of the characters he encounters knows his backstory, calls him a hero. They have a great discussion around that. And right. To hear that was all planned, that's part of your vision, it really speaks to your goals and where you see this going and how big your universe could be. And it sounds like you have a path to get there. And I loved one other thing for readers who haven't picked up Ransomed Daughter. If you're not interested yet, you get a breach of trust little promo teaser at the end. That was really cool to go back to Nick Jordan and really see how the events of the Body Man are still affecting him, kind of wet our whistle for the next book. So I really like how what you're building is all integrated.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I wish I could say that was my genius, but I know other people that have done the same thing. And actually, someone said that, hey, on the back of Ransomed Daughter, put like Breach of Trust in there. I'm like, I don't know if it's really completely done. The first chapter I've been tweaking with it. Like, get it as done as you can and put it in there. You can always change it a little bit.
Yeah,
no one's gonna fault you for saying, that word wasn't in the version you put out last fall.
It was also cool though, because there's a clear switch in the writing style. So it kind of shows a little of your history as well, knowing that Troy was an earlier character. He's been on the shelf, he's been stewing. Right. And then you read that Breach of Trust and you're like, oh yeah, this style is kind of similar to what I read in the Body Man.
Right.
And it just kind of speaks to your journey a little bit, because I noticed, and then it also speaks to, I guess, how you have to craft a novel versus a novella, and how one you can be much more expansive. And in those few pages with Nick Jordan, we're reliving his trauma, his experience, where the characters in the novella, you go deep, but you go deep in a different way. You almost have to have an economy of language where you get to know those characters very well, but through very few words.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I had I was conscious about that when I wrote it, of like, I need to put a complete story together, but use a lot of brevity. Basically, what few words can I say, but still keep the readers going and still give the action. I will say something real quick too about, and not giving it away, but it's a little, not an Easter egg, but the first chapter of Breach of Trust was not the first chapter for a while. So the first chapter that's in Breach of Trust started as like chapter 3, and it was different, completely different from how it was, but it was same kind of a sequence, kind of a dream sequence going on, where the Body Man has this thing occur. And so I gave it to a fellow writer, very successful writer who's been a huge supporter, and gave him Breach of Trust and came back with very kind words, with one exception, chapter 3. And it like crushed my spirit. I'm like, man, that's such a good chapter. Why are you saying to pull it out of the book? And this author replied and said, because that chapter needs to become its own book, different character, change the character, make that a novel, a full-length novel, and that'll be your golden ticket. Because the concept of what was happening with Nick was like mind-blowing, like, oh my goodness, that can't really happen. So I did, and I've got about 30,000 words into that book. And again, I had to put it aside for Ransomed Daughter to get this out. So, and I had to stew on it. It's one of these high concept books that I normally know how I'm starting, where I'm going at the end, and the middle is kind of a little bit like jelly. Like, it's something in there. I got to figure it out, and I'll figure it out as I write because I'm getting pretty good at this. That one, I know where I need it to go, but I've not been able to like conceptualize it enough, and it's so many moving pieces that I don't feel comfortable enough to like dive into it and then get a third of the way through or 2/3 of the way through and be like, oh crap, I boxed myself into a corner and I have to like scrap half this book. So I kind of go back to that one every couple of weeks or so and go, what about this? And I just make notes. And at some point, maybe in about a year, I'll finally get to a spot where I'm like, the light bulb will go off and I'll be like, that's the book. That's, it's like, so it's a little piece of my psychosis that happens as, and if these books sold well and I could do this as a full-time job, I might be able to come out with books more often, or maybe I wouldn't enjoy doing it as a full-time. I have no idea. I just know I have to, economy of time means I have to pace myself and saying, okay, that will happen. And Lord willing, everything goes good in life. You don't get hit by a train, you'll put out other books, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah. I think that, it also kind of shows your like, how ingrained you are in this fandom, because, the type of things that you're saying about what you're doing with your own works are exactly what like me and Mike do sometimes. Or, we have this little group chat with some of our other friends where we'll say, oh, we really wish that little piece could be like, an entire story. And like, we talk to authors, but we never really get them to say like what you're saying now. The fact that, you actually are doing exactly what we want people to do. That's pretty cool to think about that.
Yeah, I'll give you another Easter egg. You were mentioning Ransomed Daughter. So there's a thing mentioned in there called Operation Scribe. I don't remember that, but that's one of the missions Troy had. I mentioned it, and that's all it's mentioned. He goes, "Oh, Operation Scribe." So Operation Scribe was one of my original stories for Troy. I didn't write it. I planned out 7 books for Troy, and one of them was this story it was going to be called Operation Scribe. Or The Scribe. Sorry, it's not Operation Scribe. The Scribe. It was an operation, but it was called The Scribe. Was the name of the book. But that book was basically, and this is one that I don't know that I'll ever get to, because when I was conceptually putting it together, I realized to write this story, I have to go live that life. Not any spy, any kind of weird stuff like that, but it's the concept behind the story is that troops are kidnapped over in the Middle East, not held for ransom, but they're kidnapped for another reason that I don't want to give away. And one of the people that's kidnapped is basically a reporter that's reporting, is an embedded reporter. And to do the story justice, though, even though I have friends that are, in 5th group, to do the story justice, I need to go be embedded for probably a couple of weeks or a month of my life, because I need to know what it's like to lay on the ground multiple nights in a row and just gunfire and just all the stuff that those guys, God bless them, have had to go through. I don't know that I could do it well enough by making it up in my head or watching movies or anything like that. So, and I had a buddy that said he could probably get me in with one of the groups, and I never pursued it because at that time in my life I couldn't take the time off work. I wasn't making money writing, so that's another one in the back of my mind. If I know what Operation Scribe is, I know what in the book The Scribe, I know what would happen, but to do it justice, I got to have a couple things work right. Which I also believe that you make your reality happen sometimes.
Sure.
So
yeah,
the one way it doesn't happen is if you give up. Same thing with the writing. Same thing I always tell people, like, oh, it's too hard, or how do you, what if you don't make money, or what if you don't do this? And it's like, well, what else you doing with your time? If you want to write a book, write a book. Doesn't mean it's going to be a good book. Doesn't mean it's going to get published. Maybe it shouldn't get published, but you can at least complete it. You can see what you have, because maybe you end up writing something that, oh my goodness, is the next book that people want to read. But you'll never know unless you finish that first step.
Well, it's funny. Exactly. Chris brought up how this sounds just like some of the authors we cover and all the things we want to see behind the scenes with some of our favorites. because you just mentioned too, Brad Thor references there where he did embed before he wrote The Apostle, which was one of his Middle East books where they were on the ground the entire book. And then also never quit. That is some advice he told us on the podcast that he got as a young author and that he stands by, and just never quit it is how it got him where he is. And the fact that you're channeling all this and you see yourself wanting to do all these things and your universe could capture that. It's also like someone like a Tolkien. He would have a backstory for everything, even if you never see it again.
You never saw it, exactly.
That one house they walked past, he knew who lived in that house, right. You know, what their kitchen looked like, you know, what their occupation was, and when they moved into town. And it was just a house, you know, the characters walked by at some point.
Right.
And it sounds like you want that level of omniscience and knowledge of the universe, which is pretty cool.
To me, I know you can do stories without having that, but I think having that just gives it much more authenticity. And yes, absolutely. Yep. For the never quit advice, I'm sure Brad Thor is the one that I heard it from. It is the one piece of advice that out of everything I've heard from authors, it's the one thing that I think is kind of that universal thread.
Sure.
Because everybody has a little bit of a different story on how they made it and how they got there. Like a lot of times I've talked to authors and they say, well, I just got lucky. And I always go, yeah, but I don't believe in luck. Like, well, what do you mean you don't believe in luck? I said, no, I believe in fate. I believe your actions have repercussions, but I don't believe you get lucky. And I mentioned some other podcasts, and I don't like to harp on it, but to me, the best example of that is Jack Carr and the Terminal List being made. I don't know if we talked about it when we talked about the series, the Amazon series last year, but you know that series wasn't made because Jack forced it to happen or he got lucky. No, that series got made because while he was active duty, while he was an officer, he gave some really good advice to someone getting out of the military. That person took that advice, ended up following through on what Jack had advised, got a job working with who else but Chris Pratt, and requested that book for Chris Pratt. So to me, that's not getting lucky. That's you're putting something good out there and someone else is, you know, basically pulling it forward eventually, and you're getting paid back for something that you might have been innocuous. You did it not even thinking, because that's who you are. Well, that comes forward at some point in life, and then something happens to you because of a seed you planted maybe a year ago, maybe 20 years ago, that, you know, germinates for all that time, and it happens. And I know some people would say, well, some people never make it. Yeah, and I don't know why they don't make it. Maybe they just didn't try hard enough. Maybe they just didn't make the right contacts. But I think it's not for getting lucky or being in the right place at the right time. I think it's you're putting everything out there you can, and something catches on, something grabs, and you don't know what that's going to be. That's why you put as much out there as you can. That's why you do as much good. You help as many people as you can because it's the right thing to do. And maybe that will be the thing that helps you. And if it doesn't, then you still did the right thing. Doesn't matter.
You put yourself in the position to be lucky. You know?
Right.
I feel like we should have introduced you as financial analyst, author, and life coach, Eric Bishop.
I do public speaking, $25,000 a conference. I don't do, I'll give you my Cayman account. So
there you go.
Get off the books. Sorry, IRS, but you guys take enough of my money.
Well, what if, since we hinted at it earlier, we get into a few spoilers here for the crew that has read Ransomed Daughter? Because there's a couple things I do want to ask you about the choices you made there in crafting that book. So anybody who hasn't picked it up, go ahead and download it on Kindle or purchase a copy on Amazon. Ransomed Daughter by Eric Bishop. But spoiler warning coming here. You got the twist. And Chris and I have coined it the Howdy twist from the Chris Howdy series with Haley Chill. Every one of his books, a trademark is the twist. I feel like we should call it the Bishop Bend, because when we're getting clues about the finger maybe not being her finger and Troy having a bad feeling about this, and literally it all comes to a head when they're about to breach the door. Like, you built up some really awesome suspense there in a very short amount of page time.
Thank you. I'd like to say it was intentional because it was. Just didn't know if it was going to work. Yeah, the twist with what I did with that, it was, you know, it was organic. It was definitely organic. But I know with reading enough books out there that, boy, if you in the first couple chapters can guess exactly what's going to happen in the story, that's kind of boring. And not to say that every book I'm going to write is going to have a twist. Absolutely not. But I want you want to have that mystery and that suspense, and if you can get a moment in there that people go, "Oh,
Oh
that's what
yeah.
it really is," then I think you've done your job. And some people might not like it. Some people might say gimmicky or, "Oh, of course it's the father. That's the bad. It's this and that." But you also do the best you can.
Well, I think you did enough like groundwork to like lay the like breadcrumbs in terms of the father being like a little suspicious. And but I think like the bigger twist is this idea that she was in on it, right? And then that he Troy is like this excellent person that, picking up. Like I like that aspect of it. I think like my favorite part about this was Troy, and I'm excited to read a little bit more about him, going forward. And I think you kind of see how good he is, in a shorter period of time. He's able to pick up on these little things, and then you're sort of, as you're writing, those couple chapters, you're sort of teasing us and forces us to want to keep reading. Like, oh, he does, you don't spill the beans right away. It's like, oh, I have this idea, like I'll get back to it, or let me think about it, that kind of stuff.
And their relationship, it builds up to Troy and all of that we've learned about him. Saving Abby, sure, by shooting the gun away and whatever, but he actually saves her by listening to her, and the dialogue between the two of them. It's what you're saying, Chris. All of that has a crescendo that ends with a really cool action scene, but even more important, maybe, is their relationship and follow-up post-trauma after the trauma ends. Did you put a big emphasis on dialogue and relationship in this one?
Absolutely. Big time. And then part of that too, though, with the dialogue with Troy and why he connects with Abby is because of what hasn't been kind of displayed yet or revealed is his backstory. Because like I said, the first book I wrote was Vengeance, which Troy is with the Omega Group, and he's on a path of vengeance. He's basically destroying his life almost. He's hell or high water. Give me the most dangerous missions. I don't care. Well, why would he be like that unless he's just crazy, unless he's got something screws loose? But he doesn't. He's a very, very intelligent person, not Mensa intelligent, but he's a smart guy and he has a good common sense. But his world is absolutely blown away in a story that will come out in a couple of years, and that will be revealed of why he went that way. And that what occurred changed his path. He had no path originally to go be in the special forces. He was going to follow his father's footsteps and be in the FBI. He wanted to do analytic work. He wanted to do investigative work. He was a guy that kind of really put his mind to something and figured things out. And then life changes in a heartbeat. He pivots and he just goes after this. I'm going to kill all these guys, all these bad people out there. I want to usher them into, a fast pass to hell. And that then proves, to be not the most, soul quenching activity. It doesn't bring the joy and the peace he needs. So that's, as a character, I tried to develop him in those other stories of what really at his core is going to bring him happiness. And it's not going out there and killing as many bad people as possible. That's just going to almost feed that fire of being unhappy, actually. So with Abby, he's already gotten to that point where he's kind of figuring things out. And so he's able to instill some of those truths in her. He's able to tell her, like, hey, life goes on. Horrible things happen to people all the time, but it's how they deal with those things. And to me, that's the part that I love writing, that I can put some messages in there that are hopefully, heartwarming and hopeful for people. Not that, boy, there's bad people out there and there's fathers that abuse their daughters and all these things, but there's actually good people out there. So, and even if something bad were to happen to you, that can be used for a good. Would rather it not happen, but if it does happen, how are you going to react to what happens? And I think as a human, that's a big point for all of us, whether our heartaches are big or small or whatever might happen. It's, life's not easy for anybody. I know people look at, very successful people, the Musks and the Bezos and Gates and all them. Yeah, they might have a lot. How many of them are actually happy, though? How many of them are actually doing something that fills their soul? And that, and if for most of them, I think if they chase money for all their life, I don't think that they're very happy people, because I don't think that fills that void that everybody has. So There's some deep stuff for you, though. So we'll give you the $10,000 discount on that speech. So,
life coach Eric Bishop.
No, I've not had the hardships a lot of people have, but I've learned enough, especially in the last couple of years, that it's like, man, you need to just be grateful for what you have. Like, this weekend I took my son out to see U2 at the Sphere. Financially,
Awesome.
the best decision I've ever made?
That's
Probably
awesome.
not. But I tell you what, when you're 16-year-olds don't always show emotion stuff. When your 16-year-old gives you a hug, gives you a kiss on the cheek, and it's like, that's the greatest concert I've ever seen. Thank you, Dad. You're like, that was worth the money. Screw the
Yeah,
money.
exactly.
Absolutely.
So, quick story on that too. So I got floor tickets, and I got them a long time ago. And then, of course, I did my research these last couple months of, okay, how do you get close to the front of the stage? And read a bunch of blogs, figured out. And so we were up at, they said you couldn't stay overnight at the Sphere. So we were at the Sphere at 6:20, and we were number 86 and 87 in the list, on the line of because you had to go in the morning, get a bracelet, a numbered bracelet, and then go back with that bracelet in the evening to actually go at that time. Like, they numbered, like number 1, 2, 3 would go in.
Yeah.
And then you could go into the stage. So we got there early enough that we could get close to the front. So we're there. We're about 3. I was going to go towards the left side of the stage, closer to the edge. And the people we were with were like, no, you really want to be in the center to see Bono. Even if you're 4 back, you'd rather be 4 back in front of Bono versus 2 back on the edges side, because they don't do much on the edges side of the stage. Everything's center stage. So sure enough, we are. It was the most amazing thing. And then they got to Until the End of the World, which is one of my favorite songs. And Bono starts reaching and coming towards the center of the stage, and he was reaching for people.
Man.
Comes into the crowd, flips over on his back, and is putting his arm out. And right before he gets up, my son got pushed by the guy we were with, in a good way, because he's like, you got to get closer, Bruce. Pushes him up, and Bruce grabs Bono's arm for about half a second. And so he comes back and he's like, I touched Bono. That's all I've heard for the last 2 days. Is he grabbed me yesterday even. He goes, that's the hand that touched Bono. And I'm just like,
can't watch it.
But like, as a dad, man, I was tearing up, because I was like, that's the freaking coolest thing in the world. Because I grew up as a teenager. Guess who I loved? Bono. And so my son's at that concert, and I'm enjoying it with him.
That's amazing.
I did have a copy of Ransomed Daughter for him. I did personalize and all that. And I tried like 6 people at the venue being like, hey, I got a book for Bono. And they're all like, no, we won't take it. Go to
You
that.
didn't throw it at him and then get kicked
I figured
out.
if I threw something at him, I was going to be escorted out. I've done a lot of I work with one of my friends is the security director for a lot of big bands. So I know what's frowned upon.
Don't do it.
I went to like 8 Shinedown shows last year with my friend John. And so I didn't throw a book at him, but I'm going to mail it to him. I mailed him the Body Man, because I had the Body Man. I mentioned Bono in the acknowledgments. I never got any acknowledgement that it was received or any of that. I sent it to his management company. I'll do the same thing, and I'll just in my brain go, maybe he'll see this one.
That's so funny.
I still got to see the greatest concert, and my son got to touch Bono. And
that's a great experience.
One of the guys, so a couple of people that were the first in line, they were kind of ones telling us how it worked. They were in the center, and Bono bit one of the guy's hands in a very playful way. He grabbed the guy's hand, and I got a video of it, and he just reached up and goes. So they're telling me after the show, I was like,
bites his hand.
That's Bono. They're like, Bono bit his hand. And I'm like,
damn.
Oh, that's even better.
Your son could have got bitten by Bono.
I know. My son could have got bit by Bono.
I feel like the amount of research you put into getting prepared to find this spot in the concert is like equivalent to how much research some of these authors put into their book, like backbreaking stuff, hours on end.
Maybe it was worth it though. It was worth it. We got a story for a lifetime. And, again, it was, I was joking with people before, where do you take your 16-year-old? Well, to Vegas, of course,
Yeah, exactly.
Who's going to be the first thriller writer to have a scene inside the Sphere? That would be pretty awesome. Backstage at the Sphere, some sort of hand-to-hand combat fight, spill onto the stage like the Goofy movie.
Yeah. No, I'll work it in. Don't worry.
There you go.
I've
we
got
want
2
to see
coming
the
out next
Sphere in
year.
Breach of Trust.
Hey, I could put it in. The cool thing about doing it yourself is you have until the moment you upload that file to Amazon to go and one quick spoiler is I screwed up. I made a change at Ransomed Daughter the last minute, like literally like, oh, this would be a great line to add. And so I changed a word and I spelt the character's name wrong.
Kate.
Shut up. You saw it too. I have fixed all the variations. I've fixed all the future variations, but I was just like, how did I do that? And then I realized how I did it. And I'm like, that's another reason why you don't dink around with a file 5 minutes before you upload it, because sure your sins will find you out. I had a friend reach out. He goes, why is Kate spelled K in one spot and C in another? And I'm like, get out of town. He goes,
Dude,
no, really,
there's a
look on such
story
and such
there.
page.
She's actually a double agent. She goes by Kate and Kate in different parts of her life, and she made a mistake and overlapped the two spellings of her name, and now her other identity is going to be found out.
Mike, you might be onto something. Have you hacked into my book and seen what who she really is? Oh, no.
Damn, he's got me. I want the money back for that life lesson.
Okay, I'll knock 5,000 off it. How's that?
How about this? You take that money and you put it in towards a marketing ploy to get breach of trust advertised on the Sphere. You get 5 minutes of breach of trust covering the Sphere for all of Vegas to see during the F1 race in a few weeks.
How much would that cost? Oh my goodness. I
Couple
might need a
million, probably.
GoFundMe page really quickly set up, and we might need to all contribute a lot of money.
Oh,
That's
that's
It was
hysterical.
weird. I've been to Vegas several times. It's not my favorite place in the world. I've been there with folks and then without anybody. Like I've been there on business trips. Very depressing place. Don't enjoy being there by myself. At least me. It was great being there with my son. The experience was amazing. But all the scaffolding and stuff set up for the F1 race. Like I was going to take my son. Like Ocean's 11 moment, get up there. Maybe George Clooney will show up at the same time. And then I could give him a copy of Ransomed Daughter. Like, hey, I got something for you to pitch to Amazon, baby. No, you can't get to that side of that strip in front of the Bellagio. It's all stands. I was pissed. I was like, damn, these F1 racers, what are they doing to me? So yeah, I did show them the fountain and the lights, everything went up, but it was from the side and it was it wasn't the George Clooney moment, unfortunately. So
Well, close us out here, Eric, with the elevator pitch. If tomorrow you're in an elevator, Bono walks in, you got 15 seconds to sell him The Body Man and Ransomed Daughter. Why should our listeners, like Bono, pick up your books as soon as possible?
well, Bono has a daughter. He has two daughters, actually. One of them is an actress. And if Bono's daughter was kidnapped, he would give anything to save her. But what if money wasn't enough? Maybe he has to hire someone else to do the deed and get his daughter back. Do it, Bono.
Bang.
Well, who protects the office of the president? The body man.
The Body Man. There it is.
Body man protects the office of the president. What does that mean? First of all, you should pick up a copy and you should realize that the body man's job is pretty complicated.
Yes, it's very complicated.
Well, there it is. Thanks, Eric, for joining us again. What is this? I think your third time on the podcast. And
Yes, it is.
So,
hopefully there will be many more as soon as more of your books come out. So we'll talk to you in 2024 for sure.
absolutely. I appreciate the time. Appreciate all you guys do. You've helped Kyle and helped all the others that have kept Mitch Rapp's name alive. And I think Don Bentley will be doing his part here starting next year as well. So it's great to see those characters live on.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate you coming on. Always good catching up with you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, guys, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Eric. Always great, nice to talk to him. When he was talking, I was thinking about this. He was saying he doesn't believe in luck. And I pulled it up, but it wasn't like I couldn't go back to it. But there's a quote, and I knew I was trying to think of it. It's by Thomas Jefferson. And he says, I'm a great believer in luck. And I find that the harder I work, the more of it I have. Like it's truly like what it is, like
There it is.
yeah, I knew I'd heard something like that before. So
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Like I said, you have to put yourself in a position to be lucky. It's like Jack Carr. Sure, he had a lucky break. He had a few people really help him out, like talking with, Brad Thor and getting his name in front of Emily Bessler and everything. But he also had to have the goods, right? So like
Sure.
his ability to tell a story the way he does and build a character like he did with James Reese, that began when he first checked out a book in the library and started devouring everything he could by all of these classic authors. Same way his military achievements didn't just happen out of nowhere. The moment he committed as a teenager, I think he told us, to this life and finding everything he can, book, movie, comic, whatever, on the Marines and whoever, and the SEALs, you put yourself in a position to be lucky, or you put yourself in a position to have the disposition to accomplish what you do. And I think it's the same with Eric. He's really putting himself out there, working hard and building a community. That's part of how we got to know him, is through his social media. He really actually engages, doesn't just post for clicks and try to get clickbait and be flashy. He just wants to show his life, his journey, what it takes to be an author and a storyteller. And that authenticity, I think, has come through and served him well.
Yeah.
One thing though, Chris, before you close us out, is he mentioned the cover, and I heard on a few of his podcasts that J. Todd Wilkins, we talked to him a little bit online, and he's part of the Best Thrill Books review. He's the guy who made the cover for him. He's a media whiz and an artistic digital creator. So check him out on Twitter at Zen Extremist, Zen Zen Extremist, EXTREMIST. He did the cover for this book. His work is pretty great. Chris, if you were going to judge a cover by the book, what do you think about the cover of Ransomed Daughter?
Intrigued. You know, I'm a sucker for Paris.
It's got
Like,
Paris.
It's got Paris. It's got the Eiffel Tower. It's got the man in all black. That's a reference inside. So I guess we're talking to this post spoilers. So yeah, it does all the things. It hits an actual event. We don't see a face. The guy is dressed, accordingly to like what he would have been dressed on this op. Like I think it's perfect. It's enough intrigue. Like something's gonna go down in Paris, which does. Like
and they follow the guy outside the Eiffel Tower in and out of the restaurant.
I like the lettering. I like the colors. That's dark, but it's
great font.
But the light from the City of Lights, perfect.
Yeah, you have that, what was it, 60-30-10 rule or whatever, where the 60 is this dark, ominous sky, this gray and black sky. You got that 20-30% is the title, Ransomed Daughter and Body Man. Yeah, and then you got that little bling of the Eiffel Tower and the yellow and the white. So I think it's a great composition for a cover. Yeah, and when you judge it by the book, you're spot on. It absolutely works for this one. So shout out to J. Todd Wilkins, Zen Extremist, for another great piece of digital content there. Awesome to see, two people in this thriller community working together to achieve some really cool stuff with the cover there.
Yep. All right. So next week, we are going to be bringing to you our long-awaited discussion on Damascus Station. And boy, you're not going to want to miss this one, guys. It's a fucking banger.
I think it's the fourth time I've read this book, and Chris, I've been trying to get you to read it. You
interviewed Sheer, and I couldn't make that interview.
Yeah, talking to David was just awesome. I was so bummed you couldn't be there because I knew when I read this, it might be my favorite book I've read in a long time, if not period. Favorite book, period. Like,
wow, that's big.
It's up there, dude. It's really, really great. So I really want the listeners to hear our conversation on that next week. Definitely check it out.
All right, we need to thank our patrons, including our special operator, Sherry F., our special agents, Daryl, Kevin, George, Matt, Dawn, Dennis, Peggy, Catherine, Ray, Bridget, Jeff, and Mark. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on thrillerpod.com or on Twitter and Instagram at thrillerpodcast. And as always, just let Troy be Troy.
You're deep into the hustle, man. You're in it.
I wanted to do this for so many years, and unfortunately, the way the cards have fallen so far is that I needed to go this path. And I'd love to get a traditional deal, possibly, but as I've gotten into the weeds, they're not necessarily always a good thing financially.
Yeah, sure.
There's I don't know if I'll have to send you the article, Mike, if I haven't already. I probably haven't, or you, Chris. The numbers are like there's 10 books a year that sell 1 million copies or more worldwide. 10 books, 500 books a year sell 100,000 copies or more. So the amount I know now about book sales and what you make for book sales, that tells you that there's probably a couple thousand authors in the world that could make a living off it, like not have either good residuals from other books or a spouse or a partner that makes good money or whatever to actually make it, again, put food on your table. This is a business that you have to believe in or you're going to lose your mind.
Yeah. Right. And you have to do it for the love of writing. Like you started with the love of your stories that you've had cooking. Yeah.
And that's for me. The first editor I ever hired said, if I told you right now this book wouldn't get published, would you write another one? And I said, yeah, I'm already starting another one. They're like, okay, cool. That's what I need to know. So you don't, this isn't just purely, I want to make a bunch of money and get this thing. And I'm like, no, I'd love to make a bunch of money. I'm not stupid. Vegas ain't cheap. But at the same time, if these books just cost me money and I can put out a book once a year and it costs me a little bit and I don't ever make it back, I'll do it the rest of my life.
Yeah.
but I'd rather it purchase me an island in Fiji so I can write a couple over there.
There you go. We'll keep reading you.
Someone has to do it. Carr can't make all the money, so the rest of us have to make some.